Masechet Yevamot Daf Kof Chet. We're at the Mishnah on Kof Zayin Amud Bet, all about the status of a marriage of a minor and her refusal. Ezohi ketanashe siricha lema'en. What is the age at which we consider a girl to be a minor and her marriage would be effective enough that she even needs to refuse? In other words, if she's very young, just a toddler, then and someone does some kind of kiddushin with her, that's nothing at all. Or if her mother marries her off, that's nothing at all. And she has to be at some age at which it would be effective, even at a Rabbanan level, to require refusal. What's that age? As long as the mother or the brother married her off with her consent. So she has to be old enough to have some idea of consent. If they married her off without her consent, then it's considered nothing. She does not even need to refuse it. Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos Omer Kol Tinoket Shena Yechola Lishmor Kiddusheha Ena Siricha Lema'en. Rabbi Chanina says that any girl who is not old enough to watch the item of kiddushin, if it's a ring or a coin or whatever it is, she has to be old enough that she can safeguard it and understand that this is a significant item. But if she just takes it and immediately loses it, then that's not old enough to have any understanding that she of what this deal is that she got into, and therefore she is too young to enter and does not even need to refuse. Rabbi Elazar Omer Kol en maaseh ketana kelum ela kimfuta. Rabbi should probably be here. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos. Elazar, Eliezer often get mixed up. So Rabbi Eliezer says he disagrees with this entire concept of the minor being married off by on the Rabbanan level by the mother or the older brother, and the action of a minor girl is considered nothing. Rather, whatever this man does with her, that's simply considered like a seduced woman, meaning it's not marriage. And even if they would do kiddushim or perform bi'ah, that bi'ah is considered seduction, and does not lead to any valid marriage, does not require mi'un at all. Even if she is old enough to understand what is, even if she's old enough to keep the item, still is not effective. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he disagrees with Tanakama. Bat Yisrael lechohen lo tochal bitruma, bat kohen leIsrael tochal bitruma. And therefore, because the marriage is nothing, if this girl is a bat Yisrael, even if the man that is trying to do something to marry her is a kohen, she cannot eat terumah. The marriage is not effective. And if this girl is a bat kohen and she does some kind of marriage or bi'ah with a Yisrael, then she can continue to eat terumah as a bat kohen. Again, the marriage is nothing. So Rabbi Eliezer, as the Gemara will explain, is very consistent in his view. Now, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Kol akaba shehi min ha'ish, ki'ilu hi ishto. Kol akaba she'ena min ha'ish, ki'ilu ena ishto. A bit of a cryptic statement that the Gemara will give a couple of explanations for. But the idea is that anything that would be an obstruction to her, but it's because of the man. The Gemara will give examples. So that is considered the marriage that it is a marriage and continues. Whereas any obstruction that is not due to the man, but that's not considered, then they are not considered married. So he's giving a further definition of when we would consider the act of a minor to be marriage or not marriage, depending on either something she says or who gives the get or who does mi'un. Gemara will explain that. Okay, Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amri la b'matnita tana. Barishona hiyu kotvin get mi'un la ra'ayna be v'la sabena be v'la vedet ana ba'ya lehit naseba le. At first, they would write a get called get mi'un. This does not effectuate the mi'un. Mi'un would be something that the girl simply says. But afterwards, when the Bet Din heard it, they would write a document. that she could to be used as proof that the mi'un happened. So at first they used to write in the document that she says, I do not desire him, I do not want him, I don't want to be married to him. Okay, so that's what they used to write. But then they saw, this is a kind of a long formulation, and that's the problem isn't that just that it's long, so that they have to use a lot of ink. It's not really that long. But the bigger problem is, Amre atela achalufe bigita. People will look at it and think that this is a get. The language is so similar enough to a get, even though this is not a get, and so one will be confused with the other. So therefore, we want to make it more different than a get, and therefore shorten the language. So takinu hachi biyom peloni me'ana pelonit bat peloni be'an pana. Rather, they would just say, on such a day, this girl refused the marriage in front of us, and that's all. We don't have to repeat the language that she said or could have said, because that language, first of all, even doesn't. She could say different kinds of language. And anyway, it looks too much like a get, and then that'll lead to other confusions, because there are differences between someone who refuses marriage and a get, which the Gemara will bring soon. Okay, Tenora Banan, Ezehu mi'un. So now we want to say, what exactly would she have to say in order to refuse her husband? Well, there are different options. Amra ifshi beploni ba'ali. She says, I don't want this guy who is my husband. That's good. Ifshi bekidushin shekiddeshuni imi ve'achi. Or I do not agree to the kiddushin that my mother or my brother had me go through. I refuse it. That's all good. Yated al ken amar Rabbi Yehuda afilu yoshevet ba'apiryon ve'olechet mibet abiha lebet ba'ala ve'amra ifshi beploni ba'ali zehu mi'un. And furthermore, when she says these words, it doesn't matter what the context is, where and when she says it, even if she's like at the wedding ceremony. In those days, when they would do the wedding ceremony, they would carry the bride from her father's house to the husband's house in a bridal chair that looked like this. So this might be the origin of picking up a bride on top of a chair that we do now at wedding ceremonies, although this I think comes from Hasidic circles that other communities like, and I think everybody does it nowadays. Okay, the point is that even if she's at her wedding and she's in this bridal canopy and a bridal chair, and she looks like she's having a great time, and this looks like she's agreeing to the marriage, but if she says, I don't want this husband, even if she's in the middle of the ceremony, that is acceptable as a refusal. It is valid, and they are not married. Yater al ken amar Rabbi Yehuda afilu hayu orchein mesubin bebet ba'ala ve'omedet umashka alehem ve'amra lahem ifshi beploni ba'ali harehu mi'un. And furthermore, even if she was at her husband's house, meaning they're already living together, and there were guests that were all around the table, and she's standing and giving everyone drinks, she's acting as a hostess, she's acting as a good wife, which externally looks like she's acceptable. She's accepting the marriage. Right? Otherwise, she would be like, why should I serve these strangers in a house that's not mine? So even though she's acting like a wife, but even in that context, if she says, I don't want this husband, that is a valid refusal. Furthermore, Yater al ken amar Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda afilu shigera ba'ala esel chenvani lehabi lo chefes mishelo v'amra ifshi beploni ba'ali en lecha mi'un gadol mizeh. Even if her husband sent her to the store to go pick up something for him, and she says while she's there or on the way, she says, I don't want this guy to be my husband, then that's the biggest refusal of all. There's a couple of ways to understand this. Either that she is acting as a wife and she's doing her husband's bidding. If she really doesn't want to be married to him, she would say, I'm not going to get your own things. So who am I? I'm not your wife. So even though she's acting as a good wife, still her words are meaningful. Or it could be here the opposite, that maybe she's complaining and she says, oh, look, my husband makes me go do all these chores. I wish I wasn't married to him. And sounds like maybe she's just nagging or complaining. No, that's also considered a refusal. Others say the fact that she says in front of one person, but it seems that the context is actually about her being married, acting as a married woman, like the other cases. The context would express that even though she's acting and fulfilling wifely duties, but she says, I don't want to be married. All these cases, the refusal is valid. Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos Omer Kol Tinoket. So Rabbi Chanina defined the age at mi'un that the kiddushin would work at all, to be one where the girl can understands that, oh, this is an important item that you're getting in order to enter the marriage, and she would safeguard the coin or the ring or pen or whatever it is that he gives her. That's the age. Less than that, even refusal is not required. They're just not married. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonos. Shmuel says, yes, we follow the halacha that whatever age that is. Tana. כתנה שלא מענה ועמדה ונישאת משום רבי יהודה בן בתרה אמרו נישואיה הן מעוניה. Another way altogether to perform mi'un, not by saying anything, but by doing something. If you have a girl who was engaged, we'll see, engaged or married, she was put together with another man by her mother or brother. She didn't do mi'un, she didn't refuse, but at some point, as a minor, she went and married a second man, a second guy. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara says that second marriage is the same as a refusal, right? By her act of marrying someone else, that shows that she doesn't like the first guy. She doesn't have to say anything. The actions speak louder than words here. Okay, good. So that's Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara. A few questions about exactly how he applies this law. What if she only does kiddushin with the second guy? Would Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara also consider that a refusal? Nisu'in with the second guy is a much stronger action, saying I'm totally with the second guy. So that's totally refusing the first, but only kiddushin with the first guy, I'm not sure. What would he say about that? So here's an answer. Tashema ketana shelo me'ana ve'amda v'nitkadesha mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara amru kiddusha hen me'oneha. Yes, in fact, we have another statement of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara. It's exactly the same as the first, except it has kiddushin instead of nisuin. So yes, if she was put together with one man by her mother and brother, and then she gets up on her own and receives kiddushin only from another man, that itself is a testament that she refuses that first guy. And is valid. Okay, Ibalehu. More questions about Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara. Peligi Rabbanan aleh Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara. Oh, lo. When he said this halacha, is he a minority opinion and the other rabbis disagree with him, or is this unanimous? He just happened to say it and everyone agrees. We're not sure. And if the rabbis do have a disagreement regarding this, b'kiddushin or afilu b'nisuin, do they disagree with him only in kiddushin because that's less of an act of refusal, or do they even disagree in the first halacha? He mentions that when she goes and marries a second one, is even that, would they disagree and say that's not considered refusal? She actually has to say, I refused my first husband. And maybe doing an action, even nisuin with the second guy, is not considered a refusal. And if you want to say that they disagree on all matters, do we follow the halacha like Rabbi ben Betara or not? And assuming again that they do that the disagreement is regarding both cases, well, so is halacha like Rabbi Yehuda, and you think halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Betara? Is it like his first statement regarding nisuin, where it's more obvious that she is rejecting rejecting the first guy by marrying nisuin with the second guy, or is the halacha like him even if the second halacha that we mentioned, even if she does only kiddushin with the second guy, which is less of a rejection of the first husband. All right, we have all these questions. We're going to answer them. Ta'ashema, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, halacha miklar de pelige. So since Shemuel said, in a way, across the board, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. He didn't specify regarding kiddushin or regarding nisuin. It means that we follow the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera in both cases, and it sounds like that the rabbis disagree in both cases. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to say halacha is like him if everyone agrees to it. So yes, they disagree on both. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera applies his halacha in both cases, and the halacha is like him in both cases. Okay, still more questions. Regarding the first husband, does it matter if she had been married to the first husband, or only had kiddushin with the first husband, and she would do mi'un. Remember, we had Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai yesterday. Bet Hillel says mi'un works not only after kiddushin, but even after nisuin. So does Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera's act of mi'un work after nisuin, or only after kiddushin? Tashema dechalate abedan imrud shedar Rabbi zuged rabanan lemibdikinhu. Well, we can try to answer this question from a story about Abadan. We saw him and the story about him a couple of days ago, where we mentioned in that story that as a punishment for him showing disrespect, his two daughters-in-law refused his sons. So now we get a fuller version of the story. In fact, they rebelled. Rebellious wife means a wife who says, I refuse to sleep with my husband. So it sounds like they rebelled, but we wanted to check it, investigate. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the teacher of Abadan, sent a pair of rabbis to go and check out the situation. So So these two sages came and told the two daughters-in-law, hey, look, your husbands are coming. So the two daughters-in-law said, let them be your husbands. They're not, insinuating they're not our husbands, or we don't want them to be our husbands. Okay, Amar Rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, that is certainly a language of refusal, even though they didn't say exactly the language of we no longer want, but by giving this sarcastic remark, let them be your husbands, you two sages, we don't want them. So that is considered mi'un. Okay, my love, dahavan nesiba. Now from the language, this looks like when they say, look, your husbands are coming, gavraychu, it sounds like they were married. So that means that the refusal that would happen would apply, that you can make a refusal even after they were fully married to the previous. Now, this story is not exactly the same as Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, where they marry a second guy, but it's similar enough that we are bringing a proof from it. So it doesn't mean that this is when they're married, and they can, and even after being married to the first husband, still they can do this kind of indirect refusal. No, not necessarily. Maybe they only had kiddushin with these women. And the fact that it says your husbands are coming, meaning your husbands to be, the people that are going to be your husbands. So not necessarily, we can't really prove from here either way. Anyway, and we say, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, and even if they were married to the first guy, and then there was the father or brother married her off kiddushin and nisuin to one man, and then she went and indicated in any way that she does not want that, for example, by doing kiddushin with the second man, that it's by itself is effective as a valid mi'un. So you see, we are pretty lenient in accepting refusal from a minor. Okay, Rabbi Elazar Omer, or rather Rabbi Eliezer, says that the act of a minor is nothing and does not need mi'un. He disagrees with this entire institution. אמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל חוזרני על כל שדה חכמים ולא מצאתי אדם שישבה מידותיו בקטנה כרבי אליעזר. Shmuel said, I checked all the opinions of all the sages and I have not found anyone who is as consistent regarding a minor as Rabbi Eliezer. He's absolutely consistent. The other sages are not so consistent. How so? שעשה רבי אליעזר כמטיילת עמו בחסר ועומדת מחיקו וטובלת ואוכלת בתרומה לערב. For example, if the girl, the minor, is a bat kohen, and even if she is with a man, even if they would have bi'ah as act of nisu'in together, Rabbi Eliezer says we don't consider that to be legally effective. Rather, it's like they were just strolling in the garden together, and she gets up from his bosom, and she can do tevilah. You have to do tevilah because she'd be tameh, but then she can go and eat terumah that night, even if she's a bat kohen. And the guys of Israel, we consider that act as being zero, and she is single. So you see, Rabbi Eliezer is consistent. Okay, I mean, this statement is treating bi'ah with a minor kind of casually, and of course we're talking about a very different context back then. When the men here were talking about a man, it could be that it's talking about a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old and a 11-year-old girl. Even back then in Roman times, I don't think this happened very often. And even if a young boy and girl were set up to be engaged, I think even then it would be rare for them to consummate the marriage. But we're discussing all possibilities, not because this was done often or is condoned, but rather because even theoretically we need to know, would that be effective, and would they require mi'un or get or something afterwards? Can she eat terumah and so on? Okay, Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, en ma'aseh ketana kelum, ben ba'ala zakai lo במסיעתה, ולא במעשה ידיה, ולא בהפרת נדריה, ולא יורשה, ואין מתאמה לה. כללו שדבר אינה כשתו לכל דבר, אלא שצריכה מיעון. I have a braita that further shows how consistent Rabbi Eliezer is. He thinks that the action of a minor is the nothing. This whole marrying her off on her own or by her mother is not legally effective, and therefore the husband during that time, the so-called husband who's not really her husband, does not deserve her items that she finds. Normally a husband would acquire whatever she finds on the street, and her earnings he does not get, and this man cannot undo her vows like a husband normally can, and he will not inherit her. And if he's a kohen and she dies, he cannot become tameh to bury her. The sum of the matter is that she is not like his wife for any matter, except that you do have to do mi'un. Gemara will say, well, if it's really nothing, well, then why do you have to do mi'un even? Okay. But anyway, that's Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, ba'ala zakai b'mesiata, masei yadeh, b'hafarat nedarav yorshah mitameh la. He thinks that a marriage of a minor by a brother, by a mother, is considered legally valid to the extent that the husband can keep anything she finds and her earnings, and he can undo her vows, and he can inherit her, and if he's a kohen and she dies, he can become tameh to bury her. The summary of the matter, she is like his wife for all matters, except that it does not require a get. If she wants to get out of it as a minor, all she needs to do is state that refusal, and she can go free, and the marriage is annulled. So both agree that you require mi'un, except that Rabbi Eliezer says they're basically not married at all. Just, do a refusal. Rabbi Yeshua says they are married fully, and it's actually a leniency that you don't need a get because she is a minor, so it's all at the Rabbanan level, so all you need is mi'un. Amar Rabbi, נראים דברי רבי אליעזר מדברי רבי יהושע, שרבי אליעזר ששווה מידותיו בקטנה, ורבי יהושע חילק. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says Rabbi Eliezer seems to make more sense because he made his standard consistent throughout, right? She is not, the actions of a minor are considered invalid. She is not married. And you see that follows through with everything he said. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua is not consistent. In what way is not consistent? To buy get, because if he's really a wife, Rabbi Yoshua, for all these things, then you should require a full divorce paper, a get. Okay, so good. That's what we like to be Eliezer. But hold on, Rabbi Eliezer lav ishtohi me'un nami latibae. Even going to be Eliezer, if it's in fact not a wife, then why does she need to refuse? Don't require anything. Ella bichde tepok. So our answer is, well, she's going to leave with nothing. I mean, after all, there was a kiddushin ceremony, and there could have been a nisuin ceremony, and they could have been living together for a long time, for several years as a minor. And so what? She just one day just walk out and leave without anything? You require, even though technically you're right, they weren't married. It was just like strolling in the garden. But strolling in the garden is for 1 hour. This is they're living together as a married couple. So it doesn't look right to just dissolve it, just leave without anything. So you know what? We'll require a mi'un just to make it clear that it's officially absolutely nothing, even though they weren't really married to begin with. All right, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. He said this cryptic statement that if there's an obstruction due to the man, then they are married. If there's an obstruction due to her, not because of the man, then they're not married. We'll see two explanations. Hechidami, Akiva shehi min ha'ish, v'Akiva she'ena min ha'ish. What does it mean to have an obstruction due to him or obstruction not due to him? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel teba'u halinaseh. ואמרה מחמת פלוני בעלי זוהי עקבה שהיא מן האיש. If she, for example, she was married off to some guy, and then in the meantime someone came and said, hey, do you want to marry this other guy? They propose a marriage to her. If she says, no, I can't go out with the second guy, I'm already married to the first guy, so that is considered an agreement, right? She is showing that the obstruction to a second marriage is no good, and the reason is because of her husband. So that shows that she acknowledges that she is married to the first guy, and so that supports her marriage, so that then she is considered married to the first guy. However, mechamat bnei adam she'ena mehuganin li zoy akaba she'ena min ha'ish. But in the same scenario, she was married off as a minor to husband A, and then some people come and say, hey, you want to marry this other guy? If she says, oh, I don't like that guy, he's not suitable, he's too short, he's too tall, if her excuse is not because, oh, I'm already married, that shows that she does not consider husband A to be her husband. Otherwise, she would have said, I can't go out with another guy, I'm already married. She doesn't say that. She just says, oh, I don't like this guy. Otherwise, she would go out and marry someone else. Therefore, you see that she does not consider herself to be married, and so then that's a refusal, and she is not married. And this is now a second explanation of the statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Natan la get zohi akaba shehi min ha'ish. If she was married off as a minor, and then he decided to divorce her and gave her a get, that is a prevention or obstruction that's due to him. And therefore, the consequences be vehu min ha'ish vehu asur bikraboteha v'asura bikrabotav upesala minha kehuna. After they are divorced, he actually, while they're married, he is prohibited to her relatives. In other words, he would not be able to marry her sister, and she is prohibited to his relatives. She would not be allowed to marry his brother, and she is now a divorcee and cannot marry a kohen. So if he gives the get, then it's like they were fully married, and now the consequences are the same as having a get. But if she was married off as a minor and she refuses as a minor, does mi'un, then hu mutar bikrovotav. He mutar bikrovotav velo pesala min hakehuna. Because mi'un works differently from a get. Mi'un annuls the kiddushin to begin with. So since they were never married, if that guy wants to go and marry her sister, that's permitted because that was not his wife, and she would be permitted to marry one of his relatives, and she's not considered a divorcee. So this, you see, this makes a big difference whether he gives the get or she refuses, whoever does that first. And this, you see why it may, when we started the Gemara, we said we don't want to use the long language because it looks like this is a get, and people will look at this, oh, she's a divorcee. Or there'll be a difference in whether one can marry one of the relatives. And that's why they changed the language so it wouldn't look like a get, because if it is a get, there are a lot more restrictions than if it's only refusal. All right. Hakatane lekaman, hamema'enet beish, hu mutar bikrovoteha. We have just a question about this statement that we just mentioned. Don't we say this exactly all explicitly in the next part? It's a question to Abaye Barabin, Rabbi Chanina Baravin, since they're explaining Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov as referring to a distinction between a get and mi'un. But we're asking, this would be redundant because the very next Mishnah, which we're about to read, says the very same thing. So we're about to read, if she does the refusal, then he is permitted to her relatives, and she's permitted to his relatives after that, and she can marry a kohen, because it's only mi'un. Natan la get, if he gives her a get, then they're prohibited to each other's relatives, and she's a divorcee and cannot marry a kohen. So don't we say this already? Why would Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say it, and then the Mishnah say it again? And the answer is Perusheka Mefaresh. Right. The next Mishnah is not an independent clause, but rather is itself an explanation of the statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's presented here in our Gemara as a new Mishnah. First Mishnah, period. Now next Mishnah, which sounds like it's an altogether new topic, but the Mishnayot originally didn't have the Gemara in it. Just the Mishnayot read straight through, and so therefore you should not stop there. This next Mishnah is itself a continuation, an explanation of the previous Mishnah. Next Mishnah, Hamema'enet beish, hu mutar bikrovoteha v'hi muteret bikrovav velo pesala min hakehuna. There's a difference between mi'un and get. If a woman if a girl refuses her husband as a minor, then they continue after that to be permitted to each other's relatives, and she can marry a kohen. She's not considered a divorcee. On the other hand, Natan Laget, hu asu bikrovoteha asura bikrovav upesalah min hakehuna. But if he gives her a get, even though she is a minor, that means that they were married and that now the divorce is in effect, and that has the same effect as any divorce where he remains prohibited to her relatives and she is prohibited to his relatives because they were married. And even after a divorce, if they were in fact married, then they are prohibited to each other's relatives forever after that. And now she's a divorcee and she cannot marry a kohen. Okay, so these two cases are clear, but now we're going to mix them up. If both of them happen to the same man or to different men in succession, that's going to be the next two cases. Natan la get v'hechezira me'anabo v'niset le'acher v'nit armela o nit kadesha muteret lachzor bo. So the case is that an adult is married to a minor. He gives her a get, and then he takes her back. That's permitted. One is allowed to, as long as he's not a kohen, one is allowed to return his divorcee as long as she was not with any other man in the middle and in between. And here she wasn't. Good. So now they're married for the second time, and this time she refuses him. She's still a minor. Mi'anabo. And then, now that she's free, she goes and marries a second man. That's also okay. And now the second man dies or divorces her. She is allowed to go back to her first husband. Now this is strange. It should seem that she wouldn't be allowed because the first time they were married, she received a get, and therefore this would be returning his divorcee after she was married to another. But the reason why it's permitted is because they were married a second time and she refused him. In some way, that second marriage that has a refusal, that refusal undoes, in a way, even the first marriage. Or another way to think about it is that it shows that she is a minor still, acting as a minor, and therefore the get that she received from after the first marriage was only a get as a d'Rabbanan level, because the whole marriage was only d'Rabbanan and always subject to a possibility of nullification. And it in fact is nullified. So when it is nullified the second time, then that kind of shows that the first one was also not real, nullified, and not as if it didn't exist. And therefore, in a way, she was never married to the first husband, and after the second one dies or divorces, she can go back to the first. Okay, big chidush. Now, the other way around. Mi'anabo vechzira. She's married to first husband, and she refuses him. And then natan laget v'niset lacher, and then they get married a second time. Same husband, and then he divorces her, and now she's free. She marries husband B, and he dies or divorces her. Asura lachzor lo. This time she cannot go back to the first husband, because that would be machazir gerushato, returning her divorcee after she was married to another. Because the second thing that happened in that marriage with the second husband was divorce, so then she's considered divorcee. In other words, the refusal, if the refusal is after the second time they're married, then that refusal can undo even the first get. But if the get is second, then that's it. She is a divorcee, and all the laws of a divorcee would apply to her. All right. Zeh kelal, get achar mi'un asura lachzor lo. Mi'un achar get muteret lachzor lo. So the general rule is that if the get comes a second after the mi'un, she cannot go back and marry him after she's married to another. But if the mi'un is second after the get, then that mi'un takes over, and as if they were not married at all, and even undoes the get, and she can go back and marry him again, even after she is with another man. Okay, that's all the case with the same, with when there's only two men altogether, and the get and mi'un is with the same man. All right, husband A does mi'un and get, or get and mi'un. Good. And now we have the last case. She's married to husband A, and she refuses him, and then she marries husband B. V'geresha, husband B divorces her. Le'acher, and she marries husband C, ume'anabo, and she refuses husband C, so she's now free again, and marries husband D. Le'acher v'geresha, and husband D divorces her. Okay, in this case, zeh kelal, kol sheyotz'a mimenu beget asura lachzor bo. Husbands 2 and 4, B and D, who gave her a get, she cannot go back, because that's returning divorcee. B'me'un moted lachzor lo. However, husbands 1 and 3, because she refused him, so by refusing, that undoes the marriage. She was never married to them, so she can go back to those husbands. All right. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to challenge the Mishnah itself by comparing this last case to the second to last case. Alma atem mi'un umebatel get. What we see from the middle case in the Mishnah is that mi'un, if it's, I'll say with the same guy, first gives her a get, and then they get married again, and she refuses him. That in that case, the second mi'un, the mi'un undoes the get, and she can, after she marries someone else, she can go back to that first husband. So you see, mi'un can undo a get. Well, if it works in that case with the same man, and how come it doesn't work in the last case? Urminhu, hamanet bish v'niset lacher v'gedesha lacher ume'anabo lacher v'gedesha zeh klal kol she'asa menu beget asura lachzor lo b'mi'un muteret lachzor lo. Alma lo atem mi'un dechavre ubatel gita dide. In this last case, when she is married to one guy and there's mi'un with the first guy, get from the second guy, mi'un with the third guy, get from the second guy. So the one who she left from a get, the second and fourth, she cannot go back to. First and third, she can remarry after, even after all this. What do we see here? That mi'un of a friend does not cancel the get of someone else. All right, even though she did mi'un and then get and then mi'un after. Why don't you say that mi'un after undoes the get of the guy before if mi'un undoes a get? That's the question. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shemuel, Tabra, Misha Shanazo, Lo Shanazo. Shemuel says, oh, really good question. You know what? The Mishnah is disjointed. Tabra is like shavar. We have to break the Mishnah into pieces. And in fact, the middle case is not the same. Is a different author than the last case. The case with one husband is different from the case of the last one with 4 husbands. Okay, Amar Rava, Umay Kushya. Rava says, what do you have to say? And go break the Mishnah. The Mishnah is nice, giving different cases for a good reason, and you don't have to say it's different authors. It makes more sense. It makes sense to say that her, when she refuses husband A, that will undo the get from husband A. Yeah, if the same person, then that will undo it all the way back retroactively, even the first marriage, and so there was no get. That makes a lot of sense. But if it's 2 different people, so mi'un with husband C is not going to undo the get from husband B. Those are different people. So they're completely different scenarios. Okay. And now we ask, wait, what exactly is the difference? Well, I explained it as kind of the reason why it works with one man is undoing the one before. Gemara gives a little different explanation. Now, why do we not allow mi'un of a husband C to undo the get from husband B? The reason is because we don't want husband B who gave a get. Since they were married and they know each other, he knows her well and she knows him, we are afraid that he is going to secretly convince her through different hints and winks that no one else will notice, but she will notice, to lead her astray and say, you know what, why don't you leave your next husband, do a mi'un with him and come back and marry me. That's why we don't want that to happen. So, indeed, really, in essence, the mi'un of husband C can undo the get, and she should be able. The point is that if she does mi'un with husband C, it means she was never married to husband C. So then she got to get from husband B. She can go back and remarry husband B immediately after. So too, we're erasing husband C because she refused him. So from the letter of the law, she would be able to go back to husband B, all right, which makes logical sense. But we impose a penalty, a gezerah, because we're afraid that the one that the guy who left her is going to try to convince her back. Okay, and now if that's the reason, then that reason should apply even with the same guy. Mi'un dide name lali batel gita dide. Then so too the mi'un, I'll say, is of the very same husband. They were married twice. The mi'un that she refuses him afterwards should not go ahead and undo the get from that he gave her at first, because the same thing with that guy. Once she goes and marries husband B, and this is in the middle case of the Mishnah, he also is going to want to try to do intimations and gestures to try to have her leave that second guy and come back to him. And so we should make the very same gezerah and not allow husband A to take her back, even after the mi'un that she does with him. So therefore, assuming this is the reason, there is no reason, Rava, to make a distinction between the middle case and the last case of the same husband or different husbands. And we answer, oh no, it is different. Akiva shabesha vela ishabesha. In the case of middle case, where it's one, she does get and mi'un with one man, then in that case, he already tried to lead her astray and she didn't, right? Because you see that they were married once, he gave her a get. They were married again, and even though he convinced her, hey, come marry me again, but she didn't agree. She refused him. So you see that she has the power in the middle case of the Mishnah to overcome his influence, and therefore in that case we don't worry about that. So that case we allow her, even after she marries a second husband, to go back to the first husband. Whereas in the last case of the Mishnah, where it's different husbands, then she never showed that she has the power to overcome his influence, and therefore we are not going to allow her to go back to any of the husbands who gave her a get. Okay, so therefore that would not be a difficulty. We can, in fact, explain the two cases. Since we can reconcile these two cases, so we're going to go back to the drawing board and reformulate the original question. Ela I kashya de chabre ade chabre kashya. Says you're right. The middle case is where she does two actions to one man, and the last case is where she does two different actions to two different men. Actually, four different men in the end. And so that's why there's a fundamental difference between those cases. So those are not the contradiction, but rather within the middle case and the last case, there is a contradiction that applies to two different husbands, as follows. In the middle case says, "Me'ana bo ve'chezira ve'natan laget v'niset la'acher." If husband A, first they're married and she refuses him, and then she gives him a get. So forget the first refusal. We're just going to ignore that part of it and focus in on the fact that husband A gives her a get, and then she marries a second man. And then that second husband dies or gives her a divorce. Asura lachzor lo. In that case, she cannot go back, right? This was the case where there was the mi'un and the get second. So the get second is a problem for her. Now we analyze and say, the only reason why she cannot go back to the first husband is because the second husband died or divorced her. But it doesn't mention a case where she refuses the second husband. So we can infer that if in fact the second husband refused her, she would be permitted to go back to him. So now if we just cut off the first refusal, we have husband A, he gives her a get. Then as husband B, if she would refuse husband B, then she would be permitted to go back to husband A, even though the last thing he did was give her a get. And therefore we see from that just section of it that mi'un of second man can undo the get of the first man. Urminhu, and that part of it is contradictory to the last case. Hament b'ish v'niset acher v'gersha le'acher u'me'ana bo zeh haklal kol she'asta min beget asura lachzor lo b'me'un mutet lachzor bo. In the case where you have alternating men, and first she refuses the first one and then divorces the second one, then refuses the next one, and so the law is that anyone who she was divorced from, she cannot go back to. Well, that's the opposite of the previous case where she can go back to this man who she was divorced from. So we see that a refusal from the second man does not undo the get from the first man. So that is the better question that we had, and it's about this that we said, Amar Rabbi Elazar Tabra, Misha Shanazo, Lo Shanazo. The Mishnah must be broken, and it cannot be the same author for the two sections of the Mishnah. Ula Amar, Kegon Sheshil Lesha Begitin, Dimi Hazia, Kigdola. Ula is a different answer altogether. The last case is different because she got divorced 3 times. Although the Mishnah only says twice, we can assume it's like a dot, dot, dot. She got mi'un, divorce, mi'un, divorce, mi'un, divorce. It only mentions 2 cycles, but in fact there were 3 cycles because she got to get 3 times. So you see that she gains a lot of experience regarding this, and so therefore she is like an adult. She's treated like an adult, and that's why her marriages are like full marriages. She's like a full divorcee, and so the mi'un does not do anything to undo anything before. So if she's only married once or twice, then then mi'un can undo a previous get. But once it gets to 3 times, we treat her like an adult. Okay, good. So, according to Rabbi Elazar, who said that there's 2 different authors, we want to know who are the 2 different authors of the Mishnah. One says as permitted for when it's 2 different husbands for the mi'un to undo the get, and one says no, it does not work, and she cannot go back to the first husband. So mantana, amar vidamarav my dichtiv memenu bekesef shetinu aisenu b'mchiria bo'u. We're going to answer who the author is from the following story, and the following story is asks a question on the pasuk from Echa that says we drank our water for money. Usually water is free, but we had to pay for it. Our wood usually is free, came at a price. Okay, so literally it's talking about how dire situation that even fundamental basic staples that are free, people had to pay for. But this Midrash is learning it metaphorically, that memenu meaning Torah. We couldn't just go and ask our teacher a question for free, like we usually can, but there was a time of distress, persecution, where we had to pay for such a thing. What happened? During the persecution, the Bar Kokhba revolt, Hadrianic persecutions, when the Jews were not allowed to learn any Torah, and Rabbi Akiva was thrown in jail for learning Torah. So this would be very dangerous to ask any question. But the following question came up. So it happened that some minor was married to a man and then got a get from that first man, and then she married a second man, and she refused the second man, and now she wants to go back and marry the first. Is that permitted or not? So they didn't know the answer. So they went to ask the Gadol Hador Rabbi Akiva, but the problem is he was in jail. So they paid a huge amount of money, 400 zuz, for a man to go on this dangerous mission. He would have to sneak into prison and talk the words of Torah. If he got caught, he would be in prison himself and come back and answer the question. So this is the explanation of memenu Torah, where it had to be bought for a lot of money. So we went and asked Rabbi Akiva in jail, and he said it is not allowed. So you see that Rabbi Akiva is the author of the last part of the Mishnah that says it's prohibited. As Yehuda ben Betera bin Sivin v'asa, they also asked Yehuda ben Betera in the Sivin, and he said he also agreed that it's forbidden. So he would also be the author of the last part of the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yosef, lazon lo usrechu, l'isur kareti tarta, l'isur lav lo kol sheken. Yishmael says, no, they didn't ask this question. They wouldn't go and risk their lives and pay a lot of money to ask a simple question like this. Why is it so simple? He assumes as permitted. If you permit her to go and marry someone else, because if she's married to any one of these husbands, then it's a problem. She wouldn't be able to marry anybody else, and that would be eshet ish, which is an isur karet. And so you have no problem saying, yeah, the mi'un works, and she can go and marry anybody else. So if you permit her to marry someone else, then all the more so isur lav. Machzik gerushato is only an isur lav, so all the more so this would be permitted. You didn't have to ask about such a question. We see from here that Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yosef permits such a case. So therefore, he would be the author of the middle case where mi'un, after a get, the mi'un does undo the get, and she would be permitted to go back. So now we know the authors of both parts of the Mishnah, according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, that in fact the Mishnah is made up of 2 separate opinions. So now we wonder, according to Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yosef, who says, this case of mi'un and get, this is obvious. So they wouldn't have gone to jail to ask Rabbi Akiva to ask this question. So then what did they ask him in jail at that time, when they had to pay the messenger 400 zuz? Beram kach shalu, it's actually this following, that's a question that is in fact more complicated. They need his opinion. Harei hayta eshet achi imo, שהיא שנייה לו, ונשא אחיו מאביו ומת, מהו שתמאן השתה, ותקרינו לנישואין כמאה, ותתייבם שרתה. יש מיעון לאחר מיתה במקום מצווה או לא? This is easier explained through a chart. We have a case of a man named Yaakov. He's married to 2 women, Rachel and some other woman, and he has a son by both of them. So you have Reuven and Shimon are half paternal brothers, and therefore would obligate each other in Yibum. Now, this Rachel has a brother, Dan, and this brother Dan was married to a minor. Okay, so all that's good. Now, one day Shimon comes and was married. Okay, Dan dies. So now this minor is single. Good. Now, Shimon marries this minor woman, which is permitted because they are not closely related. That's his father's other wife, his father's wife's brother's wife. So that's far enough away. Shimon is allowed to marry her. Shimon dies without children, and so now Reuven would be called upon to perform Yibum. The problem is that for Reuven, this is his mother's brother's wife, that's his uncle's wife, that's his aunt, and that is prohibited to him. So he would not be able to do Yibum unless, how about if we tell her she's still a minor? He says, hey, why don't you do refusal to your original husband who had already died, Dan? And if you do that, then you will never have been married to Dan, and therefore never have been related to Reuven. And therefore Reuven can do Yibum. We want to try to help out and do Yibum if we can. So is it permitted to perform Mi'un even after death? And it's for a mitzvah, so maybe we could do it, or not? That's the question. Is there Mi'un after death in the place of a mitzvah or not? That was a complicated question. So they hired the people for 400 zuz. And they asked Rabbi Akiva in jail. He said not allowed, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera in the Sivin in Bavel, and he also prohibited. Okay, good. So that would be the case that they hired, not the case which was more obvious according to him. All right, now back to the cases of our Mishnah. Amar Rav Yehuda Yitzchak bar Ashyan Modeh Rav shemoteret lachiv shel zeh shenesra alav. Rav, who said that he ruled that it's prohibited if you have a minor who's married to one man and gets a divorce, then married to a second man and refuses. She cannot go back to the first man. Yes, that's true. That's no good. But even he would agree that she can marry the brother of the first husband. Now, normally, if you're married to one man and you get divorced, she's prohibited to all the relatives. That was the very beginning of our Mishnah said. So she wouldn't be able to go back to, even if there was no intervening guy, she would not be able to marry her divorcee's brother. But in this case, because there was a marriage in the middle and she refused the one in the middle, that refusal in the middle, while it's not sufficient to undo the first divorce to go back to her first husband, it is sufficient that she can go back to that first husband's brother. All right, why would that be? Pishita, when we say, isn't this obvious? Not very obvious. Okay, hu nihu demakedet beres mizotav ukrisotav aval achiv lo. The reason why it's obvious is because the reason why she cannot go back to the first husband is because we are afraid that since they know each other and she knows his hints and gestures after being married for some time, we're afraid that he is going to seduce her, convince her to leave the second guy and come back to him. And we don't want her to be taken advantage of in that way, and therefore we say, you know what, you are not allowed to go back. But the brother, she doesn't know his hints, and if he would try to be explicit and say, hey, leave that guy, then we would get involved and not let that happen. And so with the brother, there's no reason to make such a gezerah. So isn't this obvious? No, the reason is because we might have made a gezerah, further gezerah, that we should prohibit the brother, because it'll get confused. If you think that the brother is allowed, then you'll think that she can go back to the husband. And therefore we say, no, we don't make such a gezerah. It's permitted for her to go back to the brother. That's all one version of this statement of Rav Yitzchak. Another version, and this is a stringent version. It said not only can she not go back to the first husband, she cannot go back to the first husband's brother after he divorces her, even though she was with a second guy who did mi'un, and you might think that the mi'un can undo it. So now we ask, why should she be prohibited? After all, she does not know the intimations and gestures of the brothers. They're all different, even though they're brothers. So we don't have to worry that they are going to try to convince her to leave her second husband and come to them. Nevertheless, gezerah hav atuhu. We make a gezerah that if we permit her to go back to the brothers, then we're going to end up permitting her to go back to her husband. So therefore, we make a gezerah across the board that she cannot go back to the husband or any of her brothers. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.